really. Yeah. Hopefully you all can. Okay. Well, I say welcome to everybody. So may I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and that this recording will be archived for future viewing. Just a few housekeeping rules, please. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking, and then that just helps avoid any background noise or feedback when others are speaking. And if you do wish to speak, can you please put your hand up, the little yellow hand, if you've got that, or put your hand up failing that. Obviously, if they can be seen on screen, but obviously use the raise hand function for the best if you can. Can you please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function? And this is for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and or grab either my attention or the Democratic Services officers. If anyone has any difficulty hearing or being heard when addressing the committee, can you let myself or the Democratic officer know? And if you have a webcam, then try turning that off, because sometimes that does help with the broadband or Wi-Fi. And then hopefully that should resolve the problem. So at least you should be able to hear, and we can hear you as well. So just leads me to welcome to all committee members, any cabinet members that are here, which I don't think there are at the moment, and officers to the Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee on Tuesday, the 21st of September. Okay, we'll go straight on to item number 1 then, which is apologies for absence. I know we've got some from Councillor Gwyn John, and I know Councillor Vince Bailey is running late. Oh, I think there he is coming in now, actually, with the baby. So I hope you've got your baby food there, Vince. So get your priorities right. And do we have any other apologies, Gareth?
That's it, Chair, just Councillor Gwyn John.
Okay. Right, moving on to item number 2 then, which are the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of July. Are we all happy to agree those minutes? Yes? Lovely, thank you. And then item number 3 then was to receive any declarations of interest, including whipping declarations under the Council's Code of Conduct. So do we have any for the meeting this evening? No? Okay. All right, moving on to the agenda then, we've got 2 references from Cabinet. The first one is the Active Travel Network, and it's the statutory consultation process. And this has come down to us for consideration. Emma, I think you're taking this item.
I am, thanks, Chair.
Okay.
And good evening committee, and to the newest member of our committee.
Probably the most well behaved as well.
Yeah, I was about to say a future transport planner in the making, I think. Good career. So thank you very much, and thank you for listening to me this evening. We've got a reference here from Cabinet, which is on active travel, and it went to Cabinet on the 19th of July, and it's regarding the last and final phase of engagement on the active travel maps. Just a reminder really for committee, the Active Travel Wales Act 2013 places duties upon local authorities in Wales to map, plan for, improve and also promote opportunities for active travel. Initial active travel network maps, some may recall, were approved by Welsh Government back in November 2017, and normally they're updated every 3 years. The original deadline for this set by Welsh Government was the 27th of February 2021, but it was extended because of the pandemic to the 31st of December 2021. We've had technical help as we've got just one active travel officer in terms of Lisa Elliott. Unfortunately, she would have liked to have been here this evening, but it's her birthday, so she's not here this evening. But I know if anybody's got any really detailed questions on the map, she'd be more than happy to take them, by email or whatever afterwards. So Sustrans Cymru have assisted us. And they've helped us do the route auditing and also the production of the future routes as identified in the report that's before you, and also add Appendix A to that report. The formal statutory consultation has already started and we're in the middle of it. It started on the 2nd of August and it will end on the 24th of October. This report, it provides you with all the background of what's happened to date, but really I'm here today to encourage you to respond to the consultation. And in particular, I'm interested in getting views from perhaps more minority groups, because we get lots of opinions from walkers and cyclists, but we don't necessarily get from those people that might be excluded from that active travel activity at the moment. So just a reminder, the Welsh Government prescribes what our active travel area is, and that's 8 areas for us: Barry, Cowbridge, Dinas Powys, Llantwit Major, Penarth, Ruth, St Athan, and also Sully. Active travel routes, they can be walking, cycling, they can be on-road, they can be shared, they can be segregated, or they can be traffic-free. The maps as well, they also show the facilities that are needed to support active travel, such as cycle shelters, parking, toilets, etc. They didn't do that previously back in 2017. So it's actually reflecting a bit like cars need petrol stations, cyclists need toilets and facilities. Just to say, the criteria that active travel routes have to meet to go onto this map is extremely high. And it's quite different to criteria that maybe we've got under other maintenance standards or other standards within the highway sector. Routes are assessed using a robust, I would say, scoring mechanism. And to actually get on the route, they've got to achieve 70% of that scoring mechanism. So it's a very high threshold to meet to be an active travel route. If you can get your route and it gets on the map and it gets through, those routes will be eligible for bidding for funding. And there is a significant amount of funding available for active travel at the moment. We this year as a council have got approximately 2.5 million to look at various active travel routes, but all of those have to be identified as routes within this map. So this is a very important document, because if your route or your idea for a route is not on this map, then your chances of getting funding for it are very small, unless it was something we did via, say, Section 106 or something else within the council. So I thought what it would be useful to do would just be, subject to my technology working, just to show you where the consultation is at the moment and how to access that consultation. So if you just bear with me, I'm going to try and display the screen. So hopefully, committee, can you see that on the screen? Great, I can see the chair nodding. So this is the page. You need to use it in Chrome, not in normal Microsoft. Otherwise, it doesn't work as well, as I found to my detriment. So this is the portal that is used. It's called Commonplace, and essentially, every one of those towns that I mentioned, every one of those areas that I mentioned, has got an individual map, and I'll show you one of those at the moment. And you can click in and you can see what's proposed for that particular area. And you can also make comment, and you can also see other people's comments as well. And you can agree or disagree or whatever you want to do with those comments. So what you're seeing here is live as to what we've had in so far on this initial consultation. So you'll see there we've had 14 for Barry, 5 for Llantwit, 8 for other areas, which will be probably some of the rural areas I know have made comment. So you need to you have to log in, and you have to have an email address, but it's pretty straightforward. So if we go, let's go into Cowbridge. Hopefully that's going to work. And you click on there to see the PDF of the map. And you can see there's a key. So existing routes are shown by those colours, and future routes are shown by those colours. And you can see then on the actual map. If I go, hopefully it's going to let me close this now. 2 seconds. It's taken it all down. It's always the way, isn't it? 2 seconds. Let me just try. No, it's taken me out. So it's taken me out. So apologies. So that is the mechanism. So you can see for each of the areas, and you can make comment on each of the areas, and you can also see other people's comments and comment on those. So I'd really encourage people to do that. I'm happy to take any questions this evening that anybody might have on the consultation process. Scrutiny will get another bite at the cherry. So we've got the consultation process at the moment, and then we will move to analysing that consultation. So that's a really big job we've got to do through October and November. It will go back to Cabinet in December, and also it needs to come back to Scrutiny in December with a view to getting it to Welsh Government by 31st December. There has been some councils that aren't so far advanced as us, and they have asked for extensions, but to be honest, I think we can probably achieve the deadline, but obviously if they give it further extensions, then we might have a bit longer. So it was just to give you a flavour really of what we're doing, and just to give you an idea about that portal. Just to say finally, the portal is the same right across Wales, so everybody is using the same portal. People are a bit behind in terms of the consultation, but everybody is using the same portal. So when everything comes together, in the end, it'll be one big map for Wales. That's the idea. So that'll be really good because we'll be able to see all the linkages and maybe where the missing links are moving forward. Okay, thanks, Chat.
Okay, thanks, Emma. I mean, that's really interesting, particularly I think when you said it'll actually set out the whole of Wales eventually, so you can see if you want to move around the country, and as you say, there will end up some glaringly obvious missing links, so to speak, then for that joined up travel. Right, so okay, we'll open it out now to anybody for any questions or comments. Okay, Ruba, I think I've got you first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Emma, for that. So really, I've got just a couple of comments. I've had some interesting feedback from some people in Penarth, but I might forward that to you, Emma, if I may, because there's some interesting discussion about gradients. You know, so some of the gradients in Penarth, for example, you know, that the zigzag path, that would probably not make that, you know, a viable, you know, a cycle route under this. And there'll be bits of Barry similarly, and other bits of Penarth, and that constituent also raised some interesting issues around, you know, connections, I think. So, you know, I don't know, you know, so I think I'm doing this from memory now, but you know, so Windsor Road, for example, isn't a, you know, it isn't a cycle route, but I think a connection from Cogan to the Pontywaring Bridge, for example, there isn't a sort of a direct, you know, you have to kind of cross that junction. I mean, that junction's awful anyway, isn't it? But for pedestrians and for cyclists. So you know, but I will send you, because he raises it, and he's sent it obviously to his network to get some feedback on that. So I will send that to you. But that, you know, that is just a comment really in terms of connections. I think that was a, you know, a sort of a valid point. But my own observations, as so you'll be pleased to know, Emma, as part of my, you know, my daily routine now. So since I've been working at home, I've sort of cycled less, and I've taken up walking to you know, down to Cogan for a swim. So obviously I noticed the pavements much more. So my observation and plea really is that I note in the document that you've given us that you are addressing pavements, particularly in my ward, and I'm not sure if that also includes, as part of the, you know, the sort of safe walking, if that includes Plassey Street, for example, because Plassey Street is really there, you know, where the trees, which are not the right trees, are there, you know, the road's really uneven, and when it's wet, it's very slippery, some of it, because there are different paving stones. So that's really a plea to kind of look at Plassey Street in particular, in terms of you know, that's a part of the, you know, walking and cycling route. And then, because those particular issues are caused by the wrong tree. I'm wondering, whether if removing those trees, because I know in my road actually a tree was removed, but there was no discussion. There was no indication when I asked about whether we could replant trees, the right kind of tree, which isn't going to buckle the pavement. So really, and to my mind, in terms of, if we put this as part of, our zero project as well, to me, the replanting of trees in those areas, if the current trees are going to be removed to make the pavements good, what are we doing in terms of a strategy for replanting those trees? So sorry, does that make sense to you, Emma?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, if you just going back to your first point, if you think there are routes missing, which there may well be, I mean, there's some 86 kilometres of new route identified on this over what was originally proposed in 2017. So that's good news. That shows how active travel has progressed. But I accept there may still be some routes which people see as desirable, are high footfall, and they think they need to be tackled. So I welcome those comments. If possible, through the process. I'm not sure if that's possible, but if they could put them through the process as well, that's really useful, because then other people have a chance to like those comments or dislike those comments, so we get that bigger view. Trees are an interesting one. They, as you say, the roots often raise up the pennant paving slabs. But they also add attractiveness to the environment and the street scene. So it's a difficult playoff really between pedestrians, trees, and safety. So where trees have to come out, we do plant other trees, but not always within the street scene. Sometimes it might be in a park instead or somewhere else. So it is an issue. It is a difficult conflict, particularly with our climate change agenda. And it's one that we need to carefully, I think, trade off as we move forward. We've got a tree strategy in preparation. That will need to balance, I think, with this strategy moving forward.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Emma. Did you want to come in at this point, Marcus, in response to Ruber?
Thank you, Chair. It was only just to add to what Emma had said around the tree strategy, which is actually going to form part of the wider green infrastructure strategy, and it will consider issues such as street trees and their replacement and what species are appropriate, are the locations appropriate, and that type of thing. And we'll look at urban tree coverage as well. So that strategy is currently under development. And colleagues both in Emma's area and my own area are looking at that and working closely on it. And I've commissioned Natural Resources Wales to help with that work. So yeah, we hope to have some reports back on that. I think with due reports back, it's going to be early next year. But that work has started, and it will, in an overarching way, deal with street trees as well as the wider issue of trees and green infrastructure.
Okay, thanks for that, Marcus. Okay, so the next speaker, anything else, Ruber, or was that it?
No, that's it for now. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Okay, the next speaker then is Leighton.
Thank you, Chair. It's just in relation to on the keys, it says about share usage, and I just wanted more information. I'm assuming that's to do obviously with walking, cycling, catching the bus and train, that type of stuff, in relation to as sort of combined active travel. If you're walking to the train station, getting the train, then that's, you're not actually doing too much harm to the environment in relation to doing that, rather than walking to somewhere to catch a lift off someone or something like that. So I just wanted more clarification in what does that shared usage mean, or what's the scope of that one. But also in relation to cycle lanes and paths, that really annoy me is we're very good in having this active travel stuff in, and we have lots of cycle lanes. I know on Port Road East and West there is a cycle path, but no cyclists use it. And the reason why they don't use it is because they say, well, it damages our tyres, or the bike tyres, and it's not cleaned and that type of stuff. So what are we doing as a council to encourage people? Because a number of times I have to avoid someone on the road on a bike and there's a perfectly good cycle lane right by them, and they could easily use it. And that just really, really frustrates me. You know, I'm more than happy to have more active travel, but if no one's going to use it, what's the point?
Should I come back on that?
Yes, thanks.
Yes, Chair, is that right? So shared use, it's great to hear you saying about the whole holistic approach really to sustainable transport. But in this case, shared use just means a mix between cycling and pedestrians. It doesn't have that wider association with maybe walking to the station or public transport, but you may well use those routes to do that, if that makes sense. So they may be really good active travel routes for you to get to the station, to get to retail areas, to get to the bus stop. But shared use in this term means pedestrians and cyclists. So that was your first question. In terms of off-road cycle provision, in my personal view, it is the best provision. We've got a number of good examples at the moment the two best examples I think are on Port Road and also on 5 Mile Lane. That is the standard that we aspire to. You will only get people moving from one mode of transport to another if you offer them the facilities. We do keep them clean. Luckily, as that active travel is within the same area as our cleansing department, I ensure that they are regularly clean and tidy, and they are maintained, I hinted this earlier, to a higher standard than actually our interventions for the road. So technically they would be safer for a cyclist to use than maybe on the road. So in terms of usage and figures, I would quite happily provide. We've got cycle counters on a number of our key routes, and perhaps it might be useful at a future point in time to provide some facts and figures on that to show you the increase that we've had and the take up we've had, albeit I accept a lot of that take up is leisure use. What I'll never get to do is to get the more avid cyclist or more keen cyclist, I call them the Leica Brigade, but I'm going to struggle to get them onto shared, cycle routes. They don't like them. They think they should be with the traffic. It's very difficult. But what the cycle routes do is give the people that aren't that confident on the road that opportunity to move to something they may not other do, so an active travel, either walking or cycling.
Thank you, Emma. That's actually, I think the figures would be quite useful, actually. I think that would be quite interesting to know. And if we can do some sort of promotion to say, you know, the cycle lanes are clean and maintained to a higher standard, to a high standard, I think, you know, I think perception out there from cyclists, I'm not a cyclist, you know, I think you've all seen my build. I'm certainly not one of them. More running in my eyes. So if we do, you know, some sort of promotion that there are cycle lanes out there and encourage cyclists to use them, because there's nothing worse than driving down a road and you have to avoid cyclists when there's a perfectly good cycle lane next door. So yeah, that'll be useful.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think anybody can be a cyclist these days. Electric bikes have transformed the market, so you don't have to be that super fit, tall frame. I use an electric bike regularly, so I think as long as you can ride a bike, if you can get access either to one of our higher schemes, which we're expanding out in terms of next bikes, or be lucky enough to have one yourself, it is an option for everybody. So not just a runner, Councillor Rowlands, you've got a chance to be a cyclist as well.
Lovely, thanks Emma, thanks Leighton, you raised some very relevant points there. Okay, and my next speaker is Andy Robertson. Andy?
Thank you, Chair. Right, I think I'm missing something a little bit here. I'm looking at the map of Dennis Paris, and it says it's got a key which says future routes and existing routes. Well, all these routes, as far as I can see, are roads in Dennis Paris, existing roads in Dennis Paris. The walking routes are, I think, pretty well existing footpaths. I noticed that St Andrews Road and the Westra are marked as future cycling routes, Does that mean traffic, cars and walkers won't be allowed to walk on those? I noticed that virtually all the shared use routes are actually roads which are shared use already. I think most of those roads people can walk on, pedestrians can walk along, and cyclists can use, and motor traffic can use. I just, I mean, basically, it almost looks like an ordnance survey map of roads which already exist, routes which already exist. I can't understand why St Andrews Road is becoming exclusively cycling in the future, and the Westra. I need some explanation here. Cross Common Road is for cycling only by the looks of it. Don't understand it.
Yeah, I can hopefully give you some explanation there. So I happen to have the Dinas Paris map in front of me. My technology's failed me this evening, so apologies for that. So where we've identified there are a number of new future routes we've identified, and it's not that it's exclusively for walking or exclusively for cycling. It's that the provision will be made for a walking, cycling, shared use, or some form of other use on the map. So it's about improving what you've got there, because as I mentioned earlier, maybe for pavements, it might be widening the pavement, making it safer for pedestrians to use. For cyclists, it might be providing dedicated facilities for them to use. So it's all about making that route easier for cyclists and walkers to use. So in terms of Dinas Paris, there are a number of proposed, I'd say it's quite small on my map, but there are a number of proposed future routes, which are shown, some of which you've touched upon actually, Councillor Robertson, but they are about improving the facilities that are there now. So whether that's a pavement or whether maybe there's some cycle route there, and bringing it up to that active travel standard, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a higher standard than just a basic pavement or a basic line on a map for a cycle route. So if you feel that any of these aren't right, or if you feel we're not doing enough in Dinas Paris, obviously I'd be more than happy to take those comments.
Okay, Andy, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm, take for instance a road like the Westra. It's a narrow road between very high banks with private property on either side, field, farms and private houses. There's no pavement at the moment. If you tried to put a cycle route in there, for instance, it would be impassable to motor traffic. I mean, it's a very narrow road. St Andrews Road, the same, where you had it going past the Croft there. Cross Common Road, the same. I don't see the practicalities of how you're going to actually make these sweeping changes to these particular routes, which are going to allow them to be. I mean, they're already used by cyclists. They're already used by pedestrians.
Exactly.
They're already used by cars.
Yeah. So those St Andrews and the Westra and Cross Common, they're shown as existing routes. They're not shown as in future routes. And it is a bit, sorry, we've had to use the terminology that Welsh Government use, because as I mentioned, it's all on that fixed thing. So they're actually shown as existing routes. We're not proposing to do anything to that Cross Common Road or to the Westra or to St Andrews. But if you come back from Westra or St Andrews Road, you can see a couple of new proposals there. And sorry, this is quite small, but Vale Dinas, there's a couple there that just coming to the east of the Westra, and you can see there's a couple of proposals there, but not actually on the whole of St Andrews Road or the Westra. They're just shown as existing routes, and you just said it, people use them. There's not a lot we can do to them to make them any better than what they are already, because of the standards we'd have to meet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, basically what you're saying is there actually is not going to be much change in Dinas Paris. There's been, all this work on getting.
There's a few. There's quite a few new ones proposed within Dinas, and there's quite a few important key linkages. If you think there should be more, then I'd more than welcome the views of the Community Council or yourself, Councillor Robertson, to tell us.
That's not it, Emma. I mean, what I'm saying is all these, you've got lots of future routes shared use, all these red ones, but they're all shared use at the moment, aren't they?
No, I mean, let's just take one down to Biglis. That's not at the moment. Obviously, the route from McDonald's, I call it McDonald's roundabout, sorry, through to Dinas Powys. That's a key route we're looking at. That's not an active travel share use. And there's a difference between an active travel route. It's got to meet this set standard, as opposed to a route which just pedestrians or cyclists could go on. So any route could just be pedestrians and cycling, but an active travel route is that step up, and it has to meet this set design standard. So, for example, what we're trying to do between the McDonald's roundabout and Dinas, we're trying to link those with a much better, probably off-road cycle route and a pedestrian route, so that you feel safer walking along that route. So that's quite a big scheme. That's quite a big on my list of things anyway, in terms of connectivity.
Thanks, Emma. So this is basically what Dinas Powys Community Council, and particularly people like Councillor Chris Williams, have been asking for years. Is actually you're saying this is actually going to happen now, even though we've got the problem with God knows how many landowners along there and the cost. That this is going to happen, is it?
Right. So we have had money this year. Some of that 2.5 million that I mentioned earlier. We've got money to develop that route further. I think it's a really key route. That's as best, so as the person responsible for transport, I think it's a key route. I think it's something we need to deliver. There are issues with flooding. There are also issues with land ownership, and those are the legal issues that we're looking to iron out before we can get a scheme. But we do have a scheme. The cost of it is quite high. I think it's circa 2 million. But you know, that is a far-reaching scheme, and the sort of ambitious scheme, rather than just playing at the edges, that we need to be doing to get this total route really around the Vale of active travel routes. So yeah, it's got my full support, Councillor Robertson, and I'm sure it has got the support of the council per se. It's just a case of getting over those hurdles, but we have money to look at that.
I don't. Thank you, Emma. I don't think anybody in Dinas Powys would disagree with you about that. You said there's 2.3 million available. Is that for the whole Vale?
We've had funding this year of £2.5 million for various routes. But that is some of the element for that route is on there. You have to be able to get funding. You have to get your routes to a very, very high standard. So you have to have completed the design and ironed out all the legal and every other issue, and you have to be ready to go. So we've got money to get it to that ready to go position this year, not to actually construct it.
That's great news for Dinas Powys, Emma. I think everybody would be delighted at that. Next time I go to the Community Council, I'll tell them that Emma has promised that we're going to get our footpath and cycle route from Dinas Powys to Biglis roundabout, and there'll be a huge sigh of relief and a great round of applause for you. You'll be getting boxes of chocolates through the post. Thank you, Emma.
I'm not allowed to accept those, but all I can do is try my best to get a design. Yeah, nice one.
Okay, thank you, Anne. And the best thing you can do, Anne, is when you go back to community councils, try to encourage as many people as possible to actually respond to the survey. And to the process, because that would be great then, because obviously that builds up the evidence. So if you could do that, that would be absolutely brilliant. Okay, yeah, lovely, thank you. So my next speaker then is Michael Morgan. Michael?
Yeah, here I am. Offered an ever smallish tangent, if you like, but I'm just picking up on one of the comments in the report. Somebody writing about the rural Vale. And I know that out here in the rural Vale, we're not really included in this active channel plans because it's just not within your scope. But just picking up on what this person says about the lanes that we're driving on. The lanes link everywhere, but are currently almost unusable to being used as shortcuts by speeding cars. Can't even walk on these lanes anymore with family for fear of getting run over. And that's a common problem everywhere. And I'm just wondering whether something can come out of this consultation in the long term to improve the lot of people who are driving along the lanes, because these lanes were never designed or built for cars in the first place, and whether there's something that can be done even in the highway code to give pedestrians, cyclists, horse riders priority over cars, because cars are supposed to give a meter berth to cyclists and to pedestrians and all, but they don't. They just bomb through. So that's the question. In the longer run, can we see something come out of this to make the country roads safer, to make people understand that they are not just shortcuts everywhere? So a slight tangent, but is this something that can come out of this in the future?
I think it's definitely something that can be considered. I mean, I think there's other legislation coming in terms of, and some of the things we're doing as council in terms of 20 mile an hour through villages. And I think, I think that will have an impact on people's ability to cycle and walk as long as the enforcement is effective within villages, such as, obviously we've just rolling out one now in Peterston. There would be Pendoylan, is 30 at the moment, that would go to 20. So those sorts of villages, there is that chance to drop that speed limit and to have that safer sort of environment. I think it's a lot harder with a lot of the rural lanes that we've got around, and the money, as you know, is concentrated on the main urban areas. Having said all of that, there is some funding that we've received this year to look at some of the more joined up picture of linking settlements, and I think this was the point a couple of the rural members made, and we have been successful to get some money to look at linkages between routes, such as between Lantwick Major and Cowbridge, those sorts of areas, to link settlements together, and also along the A48 from Calvary House Cross through to Cowbridge as well. So we're looking to get that bigger network of maps and to join up those active travel areas. Now, that won't directly go into the rural area, but it will allow the rural area to filter in quite quickly into what would be, a strategic route. But I don't have the answer. I know you've talked about the horses and the carriages before, and that's what they were for, those roads. It's very difficult to retrofit things. All I can say is the 20 mile an hour legislation, I hope, will have some impact on villages.
Okay, thank you, Emma. Did you want to come back in, Michael?
Yes, just very briefly. Yeah, but yes, we are grateful for the 20 mile an hour trial through Peterston, which is excellent. It's interesting you mentioned the link between Lantwick Major and Cowbridge, because a few weeks ago I tried to walk from Lantwick Major to Cowbridge along the main road, and it is not possible. It is absolutely lethal. So those roads, they need some kind of footpath so that people can actually walk it, because I would. But also the other observation about the lanes is most of them display the national speed limit, 60 mile an hour, and people who don't know the roads think that they can go at those speeds. And I'm wondering whether that's something that can be carried forward, that, if the villages are going to go to 20, perhaps we should look at the whole question of speed limits on single track roads, because it's pretty foolish that they are 60 mile an hour limits. End of. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michael. No, they're very relevant points, and I totally agree. As you say, going through the lanes, it's as you say, they were never built for the traffic that we have, and as I say, some drivers do travel through at a rate of knots, don't they? Right. Do we have any other contributions from anybody? No. Okay. Well, that's actually been a really interesting discussion. I think we've raised some really great points, and I think for all of us, if we can go back to any organisations or groups that we know, our community and town councils, and encourage them to respond, to this, I think will be really, really helpful, because obviously the more evidence you can, put together, or take those comments on board, and it does influence then future plans as well as present plans as well. So I think if we can all do that, I think that would be really useful. So as I say, it's come down from Cabinet for our consideration. So I think I'm happy we can feed back to them, I think, just a few of the points around the trees and the street scene, around a strategy around that, about how that evolves, and safety around pavements, and also replanting. So you've got a pleasant street scene as well. And then talking about, you talked then later, you said about this holistic approach to for active travel as well, which I think is a really important point. And again, about that encouragement for people to use cycle lanes. I think that is really important to feedback, as well as how we can address that, because I do agree with you. And then obviously then I'll support then for taking forward this Cardiff Road, or the roundabout there, as you said, McDonald's roundabout through to Dinas. Because yeah, any of us, I think, who drive through there, you've got to be so careful and so conscious of people who are walking because of the bends as well, and cyclists. So that I would welcome. I think everybody will welcome that. So I think we can highlight that as a committee. And then also around the rural areas and the lanes, and it's not straightforward because of the design and the build of them, but it's what can we do, and maybe suggest around whether there can be a bit of a campaign around speed limits in these lanes. So I think that might be worth feeding back as well. Is there anything else that I think that I've missed or you'd like to add on? Are you happy with all that? Yeah, lovely. All right. Oh,
sorry, Chair. Sorry. Can I just interject there? Can I just check who we're responding to? It's not back to Cabinet, is it? It's actually feed into the.
I thought it was back to Cabinet. It's not. Let me just look at the decisions. It says to ensure the views of the relevant scrutiny committee are considered. So it's not to go back to Cabinet then, is it? I've read that wrong.
I mean, if the scrutiny committee comes up with those proposals, Chair, or what you've just said, I can check that's fed into the consultation. Does that make sense? So
yeah.
I'm here to talk to scrutiny committee today about that consultation, so I can feed, if scrutiny committee get a relevant minute, and that is fed into the consultation. If that's okay. Sorry, I don't know if legalistically that's okay, but that's, and yeah. Then all those comments can go in and be part of the consultation report and considered that way.
Yep, that makes sense to me. Then is everybody in agreement with that? Leighton, did you want to come in?
Yeah, can I suggest that our comments are referred back to Cabinet for their, because I'm sure they would like to know what our comments were. I'm sure some of the Cabinet would agree with some of them as well. So I would recommend that as well, that our comments are referred back to Cabinet for their views as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We can refer it back. It won't hold up the process, will it, or the consultations is underway anyway.
No, just for them for
information. Yeah. Okay. Andy, did you want to come in?
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. I'll be very brief because I'm aware of time. I think we ought to put some emphasis here as well on, after the consultation, there should be delivery. I think the public is getting very, very fed up with endless consultations, studies and whatever, and then nothing gets delivered at the end of it. Deliveries or everything.
Okay, yeah, but it could only be if the correct plans are in place and obviously funding as well. So, but I think we just emphasise that, we hope to see, this money well used and well placed and sort of, make a positive impact on our communities. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Emma. That was a really interesting item there. So the next one then is item number 5, which is it's the Vale of Glamorgan Local Development Plan 2011 to 26, and this is the annual monitoring report. And then Gav did send out an addition to it that from Cabinet that came out, I think it was yesterday. So I hope everybody's got that as well. So Marcus, are you going to take us through this? Obviously, it's quite a document there.
Yeah, I won't go through the full document. I'll try and just go through the report to pick out the salient points, if that's okay. So this is the 3rd annual monitoring report in relation to the local development plan, undertaken in accordance with the framework set out in the guidance produced by Welsh Government. It sets out the key achievements, as you can see, of the report, of the plan, and points out where monitoring targets have been met, and a couple of the issues where they haven't been met, and I'll just pick those out now. That relates to some production of additional supplementary planning guidance. In the report, it mentions COVID-19. COVID-19 is relevant to some of them because it did delay some of the information we need to produce the supplementary planning guidance. But actually, one of the other key reasons was we were awaiting the production of the new planning policy Wales guidance from Welsh Government, which actually came out in end of February, early March this year, 2021. And there was little point in the case of some of this supplementary planning guidance in producing it until we had the updated position of the Welsh Government. So that sort of delayed the production of some of the supplementary planning guidance we're talking about. I think overall, the annual monitoring report shows good progress being made towards in the majority of the policies of the plan. And it is recommended that the third AMR annual monitoring report is submitted to the Welsh Government by the 31st of October, and then it's published on the Council's website as well in accordance with the various regulations. What I'll quickly do, if you don't mind, Chair, is just run through some of the key points. So as you go through the report, page 6 of the report is the key bit onwards, and it deals with some of the objectives which are set out as part of the structure we have to respond to in terms of the annual monitoring report. So there are titles there, and I'll go through each of these titles and just quickly pick up a couple of the points. Sustainable communities is the first title, and that really talks about, it relates to how many dwellings are being approved in relation to the plan. And you'll notice in that reference there, it says 76% of the dwellings approved are on allocated sites, which is within the 10% variance set out in the monitoring framework. Although the council has not met the 2021 monitoring target for new dwellings, the trigger has not been hit in terms of reviewing that particular part of the plan because we're close enough. And it advises that there are sort of tolerances with each of those figures. The reason for that actually is partly to do with the fact that at the early part of the plan, the housing delivery was slower, and we've really caught up towards the end of the plan. There is also reference there to the council approving 3 applications during the monitoring period on strategic employment allocations, securing 9.2 hectares of employment land. In relation to climate change, no developments have been permitted in flood zones, the C1 or C2 flood zones, and 2 developments have been approved which generate electricity above 5 megawatts. And there have been 5 developments with approved generation of above 2 megawatts. In terms of transport, the plan is identified transport schemes are well advanced. One particular scheme, the Cosmoston Lakes Country Park Penarth scheme, policy MG16, has failed its WellTag 2 study and therefore will not be progressed. So that's the study that's undertaken around transport schemes. And all planning applications have been accompanied by the required travel plans have been accompanied by them before a determination has been made. In relation to the Morgan Heritage Coast, and also none were contrary to national protected species or sites policy, or sites of nature conservation, regionally important geographical or geomorphological sites, and priority habitats and species. There's also been a net increase in open space in accordance with the monitoring target, so that that particular part, built in natural environment, has been a success. There's been, in terms of community facilities, there's been progress in delivering education facilities, and the 2020 monitoring target has been met. Similarly, community facilities such as the Ogmore by Sea community facility will open soon. And just quickly flicking through that, there are no causes for concern under the annual monitoring policy in respect of community facilities. In terms of retail, obviously there has been a bit of a sea change. There's been a drop of 5.05% in retail floor space in the town centres during the life of this annual monitoring report, and increases in office floor space of up to 41%, or 41.34%, I should say, and leisure floor space of 17%. And this really does reflect the changing roles of town centres, as is highlighted by the report, and I note that Welsh Government is picking up on this in terms of its policies and the what it recommends in terms of the town centre first approach to uses within town centres, so that you have a much more diverse range of uses. And so we have got a little, the local development plan, when it was first drafted, obviously had very much a strong emphasis on retail being protected in town centres. And what we have done is to try and be as flexible as possible within the confines of that policy, where we have had applications. And it does refer here to a couple of non-A1 uses, A1 being retail, I should say, being allowed in primary and secondary frontages in town centres, but that those are really reflective of Welsh Government's approach, and they're not considered to be contrary to the terms of the local development plan, and would not flag up issues with regard to the monitoring review. The council is also currently preparing a new supplementary planning guidance document on retailing, which seeks to address this issue in the short term and talk a little bit more about that flexibility around the uses within town centres. So we hope to have that adopted late this year. That was one policy or one guidance document we were waiting for Welsh Government to update Planning Policy Wales before we came out with the guidance. But moving on, housing. I think we've talked about this before, but last year Welsh Government announced changes to the way housing monitoring was undertaken, and therefore we have matched in terms of the way we are monitoring housing delivery. It is slightly different to what we've done in the previous two AMRs, and it's explicit that monitoring should be undertaken against the housing trajectory of the plan, which is a bit complicated, but essentially we have a requirement of 9,460 dwellings, and it's how we are doing at this particular time in the life of the plan against delivery of that number of houses. It would equate to around 630 dwellings per annum. At April this year, the target was 6,306 dwellings should have been delivered. So far during this plan period, we've delivered 5,257 dwellings, which is 16% below the cumulative target for 21. Although the annual build rate was lower than anticipated in the early years of the plan period, which I've just talked about, this has already grown quite considerably, and we are expecting annual dwelling completions to exceed the average build requirement. So we're expecting to catch up towards the end of the plan, is what that's saying. So essentially, because of that, we aren't deemed to have triggered the requirement for review. I mean, this is a bit academic, because when I come to the end of it, we will be telling you that we've started the review in accordance with the requirements of legislation anyway. But that would not have triggered a review in its own right. So that's just important to note. And then one other key thing there is that affordable housing targets, we have a target of 1,622 affordable dwellings to be provided. We have a total of 1,622 affordable houses provided against a monitoring target of 1,646. That's a shortfall of 24, but that's well below the 10% trigger usually necessary for a review to be triggered. And then finally, obviously, gypsum travel accommodation. While we are meeting what's the need that's identified in the current LDP, we are still working with housing colleagues to undertake the work necessary, and the Strategic Housing Board remains committed to resolving the issue. And that work goes on behind the scenes to try and resolve that issue. I mean, I won't go into that in great detail, but that in its own right, we are actually meeting the terms of the annual monitoring report there, because the identified need is met in the local development plan. Just quickly flicking on, in terms of economy, we have planning permission granted on all 3 strategic employment sites, and the 2020 job monitoring target has been met. There have been no approvals on the allocated local employment sites during this period. And the council continues to monitor that situation and reports back in terms of the next AMR. And there's also, just to point out again, there's a new supplementary planning guidance on employment land and premises, which has been drafted, but was not progressed due to COVID, and it's anticipated it will be adopted in the next AMR period. Really quickly, when just flicking through some of the other issues there, which would be of interest. One key point at point 2.22 is that 27 hectares of greenfield land was lost to development during this period. However, this was deemed to be in accordance with the local and national policies, and 49% of all new housing developments were deemed to be on brownfield sites, which exceeds the 38% monitoring target. So that's actually quite good news. It shows that we are prioritising brownfield land in terms of new housing developments. I think moving through, so I think that's really it in terms of key points. And unless anyone's got any specific questions around the monitoring report, I think I tried to go through it as thoroughly as possible.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. Thank you for sort of just the highlights there, because obviously, you know, if everybody's read it, it is a big report, but obviously a lot of reading there. But I've got a few speakers, so I'm going to bring Leighton in first.
I'll be very quick, Chair, because I've got another meeting to go to. But it's in relation to, I know Marcus said in relation to retail and how flexible you're being, and obviously on Holton Road, as you know, there's a lot of empty buildings at the moment. And have you ever looked into the sort of what they're doing in England, where they have that sort of there was a programme on a couple of weeks ago in relation to Debenhams, massive store, and then they had, I think there was office space on top, and then they had like a clothes outfit then in the middle, and eat, and then you get your birthday cards there and stuff. So like a multi-occupation type unit, and sort of that being that flexible on that. Because small local businesses can't afford the business rates. I know there's obviously business rate relief and stuff like that, but you know, business rates do kill small businesses. And I was just thinking, you know, how flexible is, you know, are you saying? You know, I want to see how much flexibility there is in there. Does that make sense? I'm not.
Chair, I can come back if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
I mean, we have been working with a lot of the property owners and occupiers. So there was a couple of larger properties at just off the square in Holton Road. I think Burton's was in one of them, and maybe Dorothy Perkins in another. And we were actually working on a scheme with the owner of that property to look at subdividing it into quite a few different uses, some retail, one of them might have been a market, a small market on ground floor, some offices as well. What actually happened, the unit got taken up and used for another purpose. But we have been working quite closely with particularly the property owners who've got the long-term empty, or some of the larger properties, to find alternative uses. That could include subdividing and changing what they do. We're very, very keen to promote mixed use. So where, for example, a large retail use is lost, that some element of retail may be retained, or at least some window interest is retained. But clearly offices have grown quite a large amount during the period, and leisure uses. So leisure could be any number of uses, but obviously in this day and age, actually, sometimes cafes and coffee shops can be deemed leisure uses, I suppose. But we have been as flexible as a lot more flexible we used to be. I think there's a small brewery stroke public house at the lower end of Holton Road, which would normally have been contrary to policy, and we worked with the applicant there to encourage them to put a planning application in and resolve what was previously considered to be an enforcement issue. We've had others on High Street where we've been quite flexible in terms of their uses. So we are trying to work with property owners. I'd add, with my other hat on from a regeneration point of view, we're also working with them from the point of view of grants, support, to try through Welsh Government and the Welsh Government's Town Centres initiative to try and support them to look at alternative uses. We've had meetings with one property owner this week around a shared office facility on Holton Road. So there's a lot of work being done in that particular aspect to ensure that there aren't too many empty properties left on Holton Road and other areas. Actually, one little bit of information before I shut up is that Holton Road is doing really quite well compared to some of the other town centres in Wales. We've had a recent study of vacancies, and across the Vale, actually, pretty much all of the town centres are performing better than certainly the Welsh average, and are doing pretty well compared to some councils in Wales, so, and indeed England. So I think in some respects the flexibility we're showing is paying off, and that we are seeing different businesses perhaps in the town centres, but they are managing to survive and grow.
Lovely. Okay, thanks for that, Marcus. Okay, Andy, I think you're next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Marcus, for all that. That's very helpful. I'm trying to sort out in my head what paragraph 111 means, actually. It's about the changes in the local planning authorities monitoring. And it's saying that the measures include the revocation of the Town 1 housing land availability studies and the need for local planning authorities to undertake annual joint housing land availability studies. Now, that's a little bit ambiguous. I mean, does that mean they want local planning authorities like the Vale of Glamorgan to provide a new annual study, or does it mean groups of authorities, as we're seeing with the SPG and everything? And also, I think what I'm trying to get at here is, I think we all felt before the last LTP was published that the Welsh Government's attitude to the Vale of Glamorgan in terms of building houses was a little bit heavy-handed, and that the Vale was being used as a place to build dormitories for Cardiff. Does this mean that we now have more autonomy over our housing policy for the next LDP, or does this mean that we have less autonomy in our housing requirements? Are we going to be committed to what the Welsh Government wants us to do, or are we going to be able to decide for ourselves? Okay,
Chair, I'll try and come back on that if that's okay with you. Yeah. So there's probably three questions there. The first question was what are the changes, and I'll try and do that in a simpler way as possible. So previously, when we used to do a housing monitoring review, that looked at making sure the council had 5 years housing supply in its land banks, if you like, in its plan, and if it didn't, it was open to the possibility of developers just coming in and making planning applications, even if it had a local development plan. If it didn't have 5 years ongoing supply, then you essentially weren't complying with guidance, and that, I suppose, is what you're referring to, Councillor Robertson, is that we were open to being, if you like, having housing sites forced upon us because developers could show we didn't have 5 years housing land supply. So they've changed. So that what's happened is that because we have a local development plan and we have an allocated figure of, I referred to the figure, I think it's 9,000 and something. I won't go back. It's 9,600 something, I think is the figure. They changed it to show, and essentially the review is now done, rather than being over a 5 year period of supply, it's looking at each year of the annual monitoring reports supply. So are we meeting the terms in terms of provision on the trajectory we should be on to meet the delivery of 9,600 houses? And we're doing that. So that's a fairer system for this council, because it means that we've allocated a certain number of houses. We are just under, but we are looking like we're going to meet the target in terms of delivery of that number of houses. And the local plan review will deal with the end life of this plan, if you like, and the fact that there will be obviously an ongoing need to to allocate more sites beyond the 9,600 as we move forward. So that's the first part of your question. The second part, I believe, was around will we work regionally around housing in terms of that supply? And I think the answer to that is yes, we will work regionally. And the way that the part of the review has changed is that in certain areas that haven't, what's the best description, have not delivered perhaps housing at the levels they expected to. So in this particular case, it's probably north of the M4. In those particular cases, Welsh Government expects councils to work together to try and encourage those areas which need housing to try and provide it. So through a system, through this system, going forward, it's quite likely, I mean, you can't give any guarantees, but it's quite likely that the Vale would have less housing than somewhere like Rhondda and Taff, or possibly Caerphilly or somewhere like that, because Welsh Government is very keen to ensure that communities are sustainable. And if you've had if you've done your bit in the last set of figures and you've had quite a lot of development, then they're keen to see those areas which lost out for whatever reason, because of viability and that type of thing. They're very keen to see those areas succeed, perhaps with some housing development. So from your question is a good one to ask. It does become more regional, and Welsh Governments are expecting us to look at it much more from the point of view of who hasn't delivered, where hasn't there been enough housing delivered over the next period of years, and we'll try and focus on that. So, and then finally, you asked about would Welsh Government force housing numbers on us. Ultimately, Welsh Government are the ones who allow us to adopt the plan. So I suppose, we will, if they're not happy with the numbers we include with any future local development plan, then they won't allow us to adopt it, or it won't get through its inquiry, I should say. But what I would say is that whole issue around regionalisation, I think, means that you will be looking at a much fairer system, so that rather than just looking at the council and saying, oh, you as a council can accommodate, Vale can accommodate another 10,000 houses, they'll be saying the Vale has already accommodated 10,000 houses. It's, as a community, you need to be careful that sustainability argument is retained, and therefore we'll be looking at other communities that perhaps haven't, maybe north of the M4, who haven't delivered, and looking at how we try and ensure they do deliver more housing as part of this plan, or part of the wider process. And that's, as part of that, there's also the proposal to develop strategic development plans for us, the Cardiff City region, and that would be the framework within which perhaps some of that housing would sit. Now, we are obviously entering a local plan review at the moment, just about started it, but the way that housing demand will be worked out is based now on that more regional approach than it was when we developed the plan before. So I hope I've tried to answer your question, and I hope I've sort of put your mind partially at rest. I mean, I can never give guarantees, but that's how we are looking at it now.
Thank you very much, Marcus. That was an excellent answer. Much appreciated. Well done. I hope your optimism about what the Welsh Government's going to do to us is well-founded. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Okay, my next speaker then is Michael. You're next.
Just very quick little point. As Marcus knows, I pop up occasionally in planning committee meetings asking about retirement housing, and it's always explained to me by planning officers that there is no policy for retirement housing. And I'm just wondering, how can we approach this in the future? Because it's not, I know, included in the local development plan, but it is a crisis for the future, because there's not going to be enough housing, particularly in the rural Vale, for people reaching advanced years who want to stay in their communities. So the question is this something that can be addressed by supplementary planning guidance now? Is it something that can be dealt with on a review, or is it something that has to wait for the next local development plan? And that's the question. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
you, Chair. Shall I go into that? It's a really good question. It is really something that has to be dealt with by national policy, because we've talked about this at planning committee, but essentially the controls over, it's no good building retirement housing if immediately it gets built and someone moves out of it, it ceases to be retirement housing because they sell it on the open market and whatever. You're back to square one. So we are speaking to Welsh Government about this. It is recognised as an issue. It's not just a rural issue, although it is obviously clearly a very big rural issue. It's an issue right across the council's area, in some urban areas too, that there is, you know, a real issue with some of the housing stock in terms of how, you know, how suitable it is for older people and this type of thing. So it is an issue which has been raised with Welsh Government. It's been touched upon in Planning Policy Wales, the latest iteration, which I referred to, which came out in earlier this year, not in as much detail as we would like, and not in a way that provides a strong framework. But we continue to liaise with colleagues in Welsh Government, and Planning Policy Wales tends to be updated year on year. So we're still hopeful there will be more guidance about this. It's a question that's asked by a lot of colleagues in a lot of different councils, particularly further west and north. It's an issue that they see as very, very important because of their communities and the sustainability of some of those Welsh-speaking communities. So it's a key issue. In terms of us developing supplementary planning guidance, I don't think we would do that until we were at a point where there was some policy background to support that. And then the other thing I'd say is that the local development plan review, which we are just entering into, is a great place to start and to make comments as the plan, that review progresses, and to talk about it, because it's something we hope that policy will be updated during the course of the work. You know, we're talking about quite a long period of time to finish this review, and we're hoping there'll be some support from national government, from Welsh Government, to provide background and allow us to perhaps put strong policies in the new plan to take account of it. So it's not a perfect answer for you, Councillor, but I'm hoping that we will get there.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, very important point. Thank you. Okay, so the next speaker then is Ruba.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks, Marcus, for that summary. So really, I just wanted to sort of make 2 points about high streets and just, you know, get your view on this. So, you know, firstly, obviously coming out of lockdown and COVID, we're hoping we are moving forward, and, you know, things can only get better, to quote a famous phrase. However, obviously, you know, the businesses in Penarth are struggling to recruit people to work and you know, and to stay open. So really, it's to, you know, I think I'm asking you if you know, kind of just to remind us really, you know what officers are doing to work with those businesses to, you know, to sort of get them through this period. And then my second point really is something that you touched on in your presentation, was around the Welsh Government, because Welsh Government policy around high streets. I seem to remember one of the key issues of that was to, you know, this idea of creating hubs in the high street, so that we can create hubs where people can drop in and hot desk somewhere. You know, this is the sort of thing you touched on. You know, I suppose a bit like Grange Pavilion is trying to be for Grangetown now. So really, it's really how, you know, is there anything, you know, we as elected members can do to kind of lobby to get, you know, money for our high streets to do that? Because I know in Penarth in particular, there have been businesses who I think have approached the council about, you know, maybe not in those terms. I think they may not have necessarily used, you know, those terms of a hub, but the idea, having spoken to those businesses, was to kind of create a hub. And obviously they're businesses, and, you know, there's an issue around, you know, that being a profit organisation and so on. But you know, I'm thinking in particular of that, you know, the old Blockbusters building, which is still empty in Penarth, and I know it was going to be going to go to a brewer's, and I don't quite know what's happened to that. But, you know, for example, that might be quite an ideal place to have that kind of hub. So it's really to get your thoughts on that and how we can move forward on that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Is that okay if I?
Yes, that's absolutely fine.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, so the LDP, there are two. I'm here now with both my hats on. So the LDP obviously is planning, and basically all planning can do really. Planning doesn't have much a role other than in terms of regulation. That's the first thing to say. So how we have supported it through the planning process is to be much more flexible in terms of the way the regulations are imposed to ensure that alternative uses to just retail are being considered and allowed in town centres. So from a planning perspective, that's the key aim of supplementary planning guidance, which will be coming out later this year. In terms of the regeneration side of things, obviously we have officers working with businesses in all the town centres to try and support them through these difficult times. You hit a bit of an issue there, Ruba, which is that a lot of businesses, and Penarth is actually one of them, is thriving at the moment, is thriving, but actually they can't. A lot of businesses just can't get staff, particularly in the hospitality sector, and it is an issue right across the Vale. It is probably an issue right across the UK, if I'm completely honest with you, and it's one that's going to be quite difficult to resolve. I'm not sure how. As a council, there's not a great deal we can do other than just support those businesses as much as we can through the process of grants and other support. But that particular issue about staff and hours of opening because they can't get the necessary staff is one that really is affecting everyone. I think we have to keep a really close watch on what's happening. It's a combination, I think, of people reevaluating what they do, Brexit, and another number of other issues, which has led to quite a large transition of employees out of the hospitality sector. And it isn't just affecting hospitality; it's actually affecting quite a number of sectors too. So it's something we're keeping an eye on. In terms of what's being done in town centres for the hubs and shared working space and that type of thing, and we continue to work with Welsh Government on that. We as a matter of interest, we've been in meetings this week with colleagues from Welsh Government around where some of these hubs could be developed and where the support will come from. And we actually we focused on Barry, and I have to say that that's part of the problem at the moment, is that the Welsh Government funding focuses on Barry as a key town centre in the Vale of Glamorgan, and we are working with Welsh Government colleagues to try and extend that to the other town centres, and we are getting some success. But if you're talking about that particular building, and if they approached us some time ago, then they would have been told they weren't eligible for grant funding because of the way Welsh Government wrote those grants. Now, all I can say is if you have any contact there, please ask them to recontact us. We have had some success with Welsh Government, and we are expanding where we can offer grants to the other town centres too, and in particular Penarth, Barry and Cowbridge as well. So we are hoping to get some schemes which are grant funded in those town centres going forward. So I hope I've answered your question there. It's a little bit garbled, but it is very much a state of flux at the moment, and we have been twisting Welsh Government's arm to allow us to spend some of their grant money outside of just Barry.
Okay, thanks, Marcus.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back?
Yeah.
Just to say thank you, Marcus, for doing both your hats on. And I did actually note that in the report that Penarth is doing better in the Vale, and the Vale in general is doing better than the rest of Wales and England. But I suppose, yes, my concern is that actually if we don't encourage businesses to so if we don't go out to businesses and say, look, have you considered this as an alternative, or an alternative use? So, for example, the hub, then we might lose an opportunity, because I suspect that there will be more businesses, more vacancies as we move forward, unfortunately, because of because of all those things that you said. So it's really I suppose how we as a council go out to encourage people to do that, really. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Marcus.
Okay, thanks, Ruba. Okay, so our next speaker then is Stefan. So thank you for your patience there.
Oh, thank you, Chair. It's a very brief one, you'll be glad to know. I just wanted to ask whether Marcus or anybody had any knowledge of, I mean, we've all seen the trends that have been happening. And Marcus, you mentioned earlier that, you know, increasingly businesses are looking at opportunities for people to work more from home and so on, which means the uses for office spaces are becoming, well, different. But what I haven't noticed, and I could be wrong, which is why I'm asking you, is have you seen an increase in businesses suddenly wanting to sell their office premises? I haven't seen it. I don't see anything available. I don't see anything for sale. So what are they doing with them? Are they mothballing them or what?
I'll come back, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Stefan. Yeah.
It is a good question. I think the Vale actually doesn't tend to have large office blocks. So for example, we're not like Cardiff or Newport, perhaps, with larger office blocks, for want of a better description. And what we have seen is that the offices that do exist, and we've got this anecdotally from our own buildings, which we let out, like the BSc and the BSc2, that actually businesses have come back into the office, obviously in a different way to perhaps they were using them previously. So they're using them with slightly less people in there, more people at home working, but actually they're still using them for shared spaces, for collaborative working. I think that is probably what's going to happen across the country, and I don't actually see, bar perhaps places like City of London, which I think is a completely different kettle of fish, and possibly Cardiff as well, because Cardiff obviously has had a huge influx of office space in the last 10 to 15 years. But I think possibly, you know, that's a bit debatable. Certainly City of London. I think what you're going to see is that this shared working and collaborative space will take over where perhaps people had rows and rows of desks. And you will have a smaller number of desks where people are going into work, but actually they'll be doing a lot more of their work from home, so 2 to 3 days possibly, but still wanting to go into the office and needed in the office on a certain number of days. So it's only anecdotal at the moment because, you know, we haven't done any actual research around this, but that is what we are picking up from our existing office provision and rentals from us and others. And actually people are still looking at developing office space. I mentioned meeting a company about doing something in the middle of Holton Road earlier this week. That was actually Business in Focus, which is the Welsh Government-funded organisation who do a lot of provision of office space. So, and they're telling us that actually the shared working spaces that they are developing and bringing forward, they're still as full as ever. So you haven't seen a drop-off in use of offices. I think it's just changed a bit.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting. Okay, so I've got Vince Driscoll next. Sorry, no, I haven't. I got Vince Bailey. Sorry, Vince, you've been.
You're much more important than him. He's playing with his baby.
I did. I saw his hand go up about 2 seconds ago. I was thinking that's
sorry,
how
I'm reading it the wrong way around.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Marcus. Just really wanted to focus on an area that you were talking about before. I can't remember who raised the issue, but it was about regional approach and how this may benefit the Vale going forward in terms of allocation of housing. In theory, you're right, it might be possible to take into consideration the fact that we've already been overwhelmed with 10,000 homes in this cycle. But it does worry me slightly because it was the Welsh Government's overinflated housing projections that forced us into that 10,000 home target in the first place. And they didn't really listen to us when we tried to make the case that those were erroneous figures at that time. So it's kind of requiring a bit of putting faith in that institution from where I sit. And there's also going to be pressures, remember, on other local authorities when it comes to allocating homes. I mean, it's quite well publicised in Wales Online and the Echo and stuff, the kind of controversy you've had in Cardiff over developments all over that city. So they're going to be bringing all the pressure that they can to force development elsewhere. And yes, you floated the idea of a regional approach, perhaps driving more development north of the M4. into those kind of valleys areas, and there will be some development there. We are already seeing some new housing estates there, but it's always going to be harder to attract developers into that part of South Wales because the profits on the land aren't quite as great. So for them, it's always going to be more desirable to build in Cardiff or the Vale if they can. And I do kind of worry that we might be being a tiny bit naive here. In principle, I love the idea of collective groupings kind of easing the load for everyone, but we could be in danger of becoming a small voice rather being drowned out by our neighbours. And there's a lot of green space in the Vale. We're kind of fortunate that we still have more, and they'll be eyeing up some of those spots and thinking, well, why would Cardiff want to take more development? And if you can't get developers in big numbers to go into RCT, how do we fight our corner and make sure that we don't kind of get drowned out in that debate? That's really it.
Okay, thanks, Vince.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, thanks, Chair. I mean, all I can say is there has been a bit of a sea change in the way figures have worked and the way they will look to develop figures, because Welsh Government sees housing as part of, it sees it as extremely important, as we all do, in terms of the provision of enough housing, but it actually sees housing as part of the regeneration issue as well, and part of the economic development issue too. So where you have certain councils where you're not getting, and certain areas where you're not getting housing developed, they actually see the fact that where you do develop housing, you create businesses and you create growth. And so that is why we know that they are going to be looking at focusing north of the M4 to try and encourage growth, and perhaps more growth than has happened to date. The other thing that's really important is that Welsh Government itself recognises that the very point you make about profitability of some of these sites. And both the City Region and Welsh Government are looking to foster the growth of home-grown builders, and small and medium, and some of the larger ones as well, to try and fill the gap that maybe some of the bigger house builders will leave if they decide they're not going to come and listen to Welsh Government and demand to build south of the M4 constantly. You probably recall there was a letter written by Persimmon Homes 5 or 6 years ago, or a little bit more actually, saying they were going to leave Wales if they weren't allowed to build everything south of the M4. Perhaps I'm paraphrasing slightly, but it was pretty much along those lines. And I think Welsh Government's now got a much stronger view on this than perhaps it had previously, that they're not going to be dictated to by perhaps some of these big five house builders, and feel that there is a market in Wales for smaller builders to try and fill some of the gaps left. So there's in parallel to talking about regionalising Snowline, that's right, Emma's put Snowline, that was it. There is a move in Wales at the moment to focus a little bit differently in terms of how housing is delivered. And now, how that will materialise is another question. And I think you're right to be slightly sceptical. But I think we are talking to officials and to politicians who are seeing that issue differently to how they saw it back in 2014 when we were developing the local development plan, where at that point it was, let's get as much housing built as possible. And if they'll only build it in the Vale or Cardiff or Bridgend, then we'll do that. But now there is definitely a view that we're part of a Cardiff capital region. That region needs to spread its growth throughout properly. Cardiff, Monmouthshire, Bridgend, the Vale have taken quite a heavy hit in terms of housing provision over the last 10 years. And the region recognises that, and it feels, and it has a number of policies it's developing and has developed to try and encourage development north of the M4 and actually force development north of the M4. So there's a bit of a two-pronged approach going on. Welsh Government are working to try and foster more builders, locally homegrown builders, to try and make that work. And Cardiff Capital Region are looking at schemes and financing, trying to encourage people to build in those areas that perhaps they haven't built before. Now, will that change things? I think what will change is that you won't see, I can't guarantee this, but I don't think you'll see Welsh Government coming out and saying, I want another 10,000 houses built in the Vale. I don't think you'll see that, or 11,000 built in Bridgend, or another 12 in Monmouth or whatever. I think there will be this move to encourage us to deal with our own very discrete growth, and that the big growth will be tried to be encouraged in those towns which perhaps have struggled a little bit over the last few years. That's definitely what we're being told by officials and by politicians. So I can't really say a great deal more than that.
Can I just come back for a second, please, Chair? I mean, I have to say that's the best I've heard that case outlined, and I will say that I do feel slightly reassured by what you're saying there. Obviously, you have to be very vigilant to make sure that we don't end up being sort of collectively outmuscled, as it were, but that does make a lot more sense. The one thing I just highlight you said about that letter, I do remember that letter from Persimmon, and I know quite a few of our residents in White Farm would be quite happy if they did stop building in South Wales. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marcus, and thanks, Vince. Okay, so last but not least, we've got Vince Driscoll. Vince.
Hi, it was touching on basically what Marcus said about Holton Road, and Stefan was asking. I'm not going to admit, well, it's quite awkward because I've got a business there, surfaced offices, and just to say that there is a big increase in people that are looking for office space at the moment, especially on a short-term basis. And I know there's a new shared office accommodation further down the road towards the civic offices that's just opened up recently. So just saying, so there is a demand there. Okay, that's all I want to throw in. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Vince. I mean, it might be just if you just want to cover yourselves just to declare, you can always fill out a form after the meeting and send that in.
Yeah. After the meeting the other night. Yeah, I think I better.
Yeah, just okay. Cover your back.
Yeah, I'll talk to Gareth later. Thanks, okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks. All right. Well, I think that's everybody who has spoken now. I don't think there's anybody else who wants to speak. Speak now or forever hold your peace. No. Okay. Right. Okay. So we've had, as I say, it came down as a reference from Cabinet, and obviously they asked us to sort of discuss it and look at any consideration. Has anybody got anything specifically they want to send back for consideration? Though I do think that Marcus has dealt with everything and is already dealing with lots of those issues that we've talked about here. So is everybody happy just to say that we note that report that's come down to us and accept that as it is? Obviously, you know, I think Marcus has responded to everything that we raised anyway. Yeah. Everybody happy with that?
I'm happy.
Lovely. Okay. Thank you very much, Marcus, for that. Moving on to the last item, I think, which is you again, I think, isn't it?
I think Emma's going to start.
You've got us both. We're doing a double act.
Oh, right. Okay. So it's the annual delivery plan monitoring report, and it's the quarter one performance 2021 to 2022. So who's going to kick off then from the double act?
I'm starting. I'm hoping Marcus is better with technology than me, and he's going to stick the presentation up if you can. But I'll start while he's trying to find that.
Okay, thanks, Emma.
Okay, so the report before you essentially outlines the quarter one performance results for the period of the 1st of April to the 30th of June 2021. The report covers all the performance results for the Vale, so not just for this scrutiny committee, but it covers the whole RAF, as you know, of different areas. But Marcus and I this evening are going to try and concentrate on the actions and indicators that are in specific related to this scrutiny's area. So the good news is that overall the performance is green for the annual delivery plan and also for the corporate wellbeing objectives. In relation to the remit of this particular committee, 97 of the 100 planned activities have a green status, none have an amber status, and 3 have a red status. And the ones that have a red status relate to RP 8009, which is on page 28, and relates to volunteers, getting volunteers really for regeneration and also delivering creative rural communities. Obviously, we've been through a pandemic, so that action has been quite difficult to achieve. The other red item for this particular actions is NSA 037, and that's to develop a strategy to promote the use of retrofit of sustainable drainage systems, including an assessment of the benefits of producing a new SPG regarding the use of SUGs. There hasn't been any progress on that. To be fair, the team has been concentrating on other matters, particularly the flooding incidents that we had back in December, and producing the Section 19 reports. So at the moment, that is red. And the final one for that particular category that is red is revise the local flood risk management strategy in response to updating the national flood and coastal erosion. And that is on hold at the moment. We're waiting for guidance from Welsh Government, and they're also looking to agree the timeframe with Local Government Association. So that is slightly outside our control at the moment. In terms of the 8 measures, the actual measures, 5 are green, 1 is amber and 2 are red. The amber one is only just amber, and it relates to planning applications in 8 weeks, or planning performance agreements. And basically that has hit 91.9 instead of 92. So that's CPM 061. So only just virtually there in terms of the green, but it's just hit that amber category. In terms of the other 2, CPM 100 is also red, but I would think it will go green this quarter. It relates to the council streetlights that are LED, and the target is 90%, and we're currently in at 70%. And I would say the 90% is likely to be achieved because we've now completed, or virtually completed, the rollout of LEDs to the main roads, and members may well have seen that in action over the last few months. The final one, which is red, is CPM. I think it's CPM 111. Sorry, it's my writing, and that's the percentage of reported fly tipping incidents which lead to enforcement action. We've improved definitely since last year. So last year, this quarter, it was 3.2%. This year, it is 4%. We've got a 10% target. And now that we've got the enforcement team in-house, I would hope that we can get closer to that 10% target of actually getting those, catching those fly tippers basically, and sending them to prosecution. But it is a really challenging area when people leave stuff abandoned on the side and there's no identity and no trace to it. So I'm going to hand over to Marcus now, and I think he's got all the good news. Hopefully.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, well, what I'll do really quickly is run through. We've got slides on the screen. Hopefully, everyone can see that. So all the figures that Emma's just run through, they're all included within this presentation. But we've got the slide about what we have achieved. That's there, working with our communities. We've undertaken extensive consultation on climate change, including surveys, Twitter polls, online discussion groups, and engagement with schools in Wenvo and Barry and community groups. Wellbeing champions have taken part in a series of woodland wellbeing sessions at Porthcurry Country Park, and we provide an opportunity for staff to get out, fresh air, and enjoy nature and community. In terms of objective 2, things we've done well are we've built a raised bed community garden allotment at Palmerston Learning Centre via the 21st Schools Benefits Programme, and via the 21st Century Schools Benefits Programme, we have created many new accessible opportunities for volunteers and adult learners in Vale. Creative rural communities have initiated a co-working local project to drive social and economic development in the Vale by changing ways of working and fostering a spirit of collaboration. And what that means, just to add to that, is that relates back to this whole issue of co-working. So not only have we been looking at developing co-working hubs in town centres, we've actually been working in some of the rural areas to develop co-working hubs in some of the villages and in some redundant farm buildings associated on the edge of villages, and it's been quite a successful project, just to add to that. And then finally, our officers took part in the Enrichment Week in Barry Island Primary School, upgrading, bringing life to Project Zero and sharing expertise with young learners to influence behaviour in the future. Objective 3, supporting people at home. We've had funding secured from Sport Wales. Rights of way improvements have been undertaken to develop new links from town to coast. There's been a footpath scheme to link Grange Park play area with the Tarus Close in Wenvo, and that was completed in Q1. And then the next bike scheme is being rolled out into Sully and Dinas Powys, following its success in Penarth. And then finally, in terms of the climate, so we've done in July, we held our climate change challenge plan. which was approved. We declared a nature emergency as well, committing to no net loss of biodiversity. And we will develop explicit actions towards achieving this goal while progressing our green infrastructure strategy, which we've referred to, Emma and I referred to previously. We've developed footpath improvements, which we refer to, and we cleared fly tipping with an average of 1.06 days, exceeding the target of 2 days. So that's a recent improvement. Emma's gone through all the red areas, so I won't deal with that. Just really quickly, where do we need to improve? Emma mentioned the volunteers issue, and that's a real problem for us. That's been a problem created by COVID, but also actually by the demise of creative rural communities, which will cease to be in December this year. There is no alternative funding yet allocated, and creative rural communities were one of the main ways we funded the volunteers, particularly in the country parks and some of the rural areas, and that is something we are working to try and resolve through some alternative funding streams, but at the moment there is nothing to replace that. We've managed the safe return of staff to the offices on a phased basis, and that's been a little bit hit and miss because obviously we've gone through rises and falls in terms of COVID, but we continue to manage that process, and that is now part of a program to develop office space and to move officers around within the Vales offices. Over the next 3 to 4 months, that program will be accelerated. So objective 2, learning, we are recognising there's more to do in terms of tackling the decarbonisation of school assets and improving air quality around our schools. We are conducting a review of economic development to identify synergies across teams, and this relates really to changes to the way a lot of the funding streams will reach regeneration and economic development. They're going to be coming now not from Europe, but from UK government, and we need to completely overhaul the way we are structured to deal with that. That work is well underway, and albeit it says there, what do we need to do to improve, we've started that quite some time ago. Part of the problem was that we didn't know what was going to come out of UK government until the very early part of this year. So it's taken us to now to actually get ourselves aligned to try and pick up on some of those funding streams. But that work is now continuing. And then one other point there raised is we're not going to progress M4 Junction 34 to Dinas Powys, and the Dinas Powys bypass schemes as we received no funding from either from Welsh Government. We've got a couple of other pointers there. I'll just quickly flick through them. Most of these have been covered by Emma. So really quickly, just quickly go through the coronavirus recovery update. I'm just going to pick through some points in there. I think really key to note, school transport has continued through the lockdown, and risk assessments have been updated and measures implemented where required. We've been continued to clean all offices very thoroughly with biomisting and virucidal cleaning services so that they can be used and are a safe environment for officers to come back. We've worked with businesses, local businesses, so they can trade in a safe environment with the town centres, and we've continued to use town resilience forums and meetings through our town centre manager to ensure that the towns are safe environments. And actually, just recently, we've removed now all the barriers and signage that did exist in the town centres, and I think that's actually been. That was quite a successful programme, but now obviously towns are trading a little bit more normally. And our parking and enforcement services are fully operational from the 23rd of March 2021. And Emma's already mentioned the review of enforcement services commenced following the first year of operation and considering a plan moving forward. So those in-house enforcement services are now very much working to deal with the issues which Emma referred to, including parking, but also things like fly tipping and waste. So I think that's it really in terms of a quick run through. I don't know if there are any questions around it. I'm sure Emma and I will be happy to answer.
Okay, thanks Emma, thanks Marcus. I mean, that's quite a strong report, I think, considering the time that we've actually been through. And you can actually tell now where it is starting to pick up post-COVID, in this strange new world that we're part of now. Obviously, still some things to work our way through, but actually, I think that's quite a positive result after the time that we've been through. So, I'd like to say well done to everybody, to pass our thanks from this committee. I'm sure everybody will agree with me on that, around the hard work that staff are actually doing around this. Nobody's highlighted they want to ask any questions. Has anybody got any questions, or are we happy to receive and note this report and the progress that's been made? No, hang on. So Andy, did you want to come in?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I was going to keep quiet. I didn't quite understand the issue around the flooding, the SUG, and what was that, Marcus? Why hasn't that been progressed? The
I
drainage.
can take that, Chair. I can take that, Chair.
Yeah,
It's read on the SUDS. So we need to develop guidance, supplementary planning guidance. So that's supplementary planning guidance to the local development plan that Marcus has referred to earlier. And the team just has been too busy, to be fair, on dealing with the other work in terms of the land mice flood alleviation scheme that's currently ongoing, and also the Section 19 work that's been ongoing with Dennis and Sully. So they haven't actually picked that up yet, but I'm hopeful that they'll pick that up towards the latter part of this year. So it's red at the moment, but I hope it will go amber, then green,
Okay, thanks, Emma. I thought the Section 19 was done at a house, but never mind.
It was, but obviously they need they need a lot of information and a lot of assistance to take that forward. You've obviously got to check that we're giving them that information, doing that research, doing that door knocking that they need help with. So that has taken a lot of our time, and obviously it's not just Dennis and Sully. There were a number of other locations that were also subjected to flooding, which we also need to investigate in our role as the lead flood authority.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. That's very good. Cheers.
Okay, thanks for that. So I don't think there's anything else. As I said, we've agreed to receive and note that report, and obviously to put our thanks on record for all the hard work that all the teams are actually putting in around this, particularly in light of this last 18 months. So thank you all for that. So we've got no other questions. I've got no other items on the agenda. So that just leaves me to say thank you, everybody, for the attendance. We've had some good discussions at the meeting this evening. And I'd just like to thank you all and wish you a good evening. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair.
Marcus and Emma.
Bye. Bye.